Yeah.
The stuff that won't be written anyway.
Yeah.
Deciding things.
Just 73, 74.
72 was
72, yeah.
just mentioned close races.
Yeah.
72, the senior race.
Yeah.
Championship, remember that?
That's with Garda. Yeah. You know, torture. All the, you see, in my experience, I mean, I think I was put down to 7 at that time. I had rode 5 and I had rode 3 there. I was always happy in 7. You know, it was a nice position. You were close to Martin. I have great respect for him because his intensity that he brought to the races. It was that doggedness, you know, this absolute conviction. There was nobody in Martin's eyes that was ever going to beat us, you know. And I mean, of course, we were vulnerable. We could have been beaten, you know. But his view was always, you were out there to win, and he brought that view to the boat, you know, and it sort of permeated back up through the crew, you know what I mean. I was first to get it, so the rest of them would understand what he was at by the rate that he was going off at. So, but he brought that kind of, and maybe that was part of the magic aspect there. He brought that aura with him, you know what I mean, that any crew sat beside him. He would have that intensity, you know, that would say, well, you know, this is a dogfight, and you know, you're in a dogfight if you're racing against us, which was great, you know. So he imparted a sort of a fear to other crews, you know, and maybe this is where the legend and the aspect of the animals was sort of evolved forward, you know. So there's more an aura, which was great to sort of live through, you know what I mean, an experience in the sense that people sort of respected you in a way that you didn't really expect to be respected. You know, you're expected as the animals, and that was a kind of a defining group of guys who were sort of different. Not different in any way you would define, but in some ways they went out there, you know, being ruthless in terms of what they did, you know. We were nice guys ashore, but in the water.
Yeah, I mean, I've asked like what was different about that group.
Yeah, I go back to what I said earlier there. I mean, all these people are very intelligent, third level guys, you know what I mean, and they could do any sport, or they could be involved in any other aspect there. But the thing about a confinement in innate is you can't get out of it easily. If you're on the water, that's it. So if you're in there in terms of a mental perception of what you're all working to. You know what I mean? Nobody wants to lose, not in terms of what they've committed to it, in terms of time and effort and all the other things that they might want to or could have done. You know. So each time we raced there was this understanding that we were there to achieve a goal. And this thing about leadership there is probably a group leadership rather than an individual who sort of stood and said, okay, I am the leader. You might have a nominal, as I say, captain on board, captain of the club as it were there, but the captain as such wouldn't necessarily be the person who would inspire, shall we say, you know. So it was kind of a self-fulfilling inspiration type thing in the crew. That's my reading of it there. And I think I've always felt that about that year, that time that I was rowing there. I mean, you could say, okay, effectively I rowed for nearly 6 years for UCD, you know, and why did you keep going? Because I always felt there was an ethos and this feeling that crews were there, you know, to represent the college and really to go out there to win, you know. In the modern times, you know, where you get scholarships to university, and when you think you're taking what you might call raw talent now and nurturing it through to the situation where ultimately in '74 you end up with, in effect, an international win in the Ladies' Plate, which is kind of an iconic win from the college's point of view. You know, now that's obviously been overwritten by the talent that UCD has produced since then and has gone on to represent Ireland in different contexts in terms of Squad Ireland and you know, and World Championships, everything like that there. But we were at at a stage of development there. Like Tom, for example, Tom Sullivan, in his era in '64, as far as I know, 1964, representing Ireland. You know, that was it. And the previous crews in 1948 Olympics, you know, these are UCD sort of waypoints in terms of the whole history that's involved there, you know. So we were probably just of that generation that were beginning to sort of make a mark again, if that's the word to use. You know, so we had the cyclical evolution of sort of an iconic crew or crews at that time.
So and you mentioned Tom there, like it's I don't know, it's probably no coincidence that feeling was there, that kind of ethos, or that you were. I mean, I think Jim Scally mentioned that you'd see the pictures on the wall in the club.
Yeah.
You'd see Tom's crew, you'd see trophies, how they were
Yeah.
dressed, how they were record at UCD, and
Yeah.
you wanted to follow through on.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I mean, I would have still have huge respect for Tom because of the commitment. Everything is commitment. So whether it's the crew that's committed or whether it's the coach. The coach was there, and if you're on the water, he was there, and he was the one who started giving you and you're saying, God, this guy is doing it. Like, he was a teacher, and he was taking his time out there, and all the things that, you know, you never think about until years afterwards. You know, the amount of time he pushed in, going up and down that bank. And year in, year out that I was involved with anyway there, and so you know, the strategies and the various regimes that were involved in terms of on the water work there, you know, ultimately that was all sort of self-fulfilling. We got to the stage, you know, in '74 there, where with combination of everything with Jeffrey Page tied in with it, of course, but Tom really was the bedrock, and he was sort of the tier up from Donald Hamilton in my time. So Donald Hamilton had laid a certain foundation, and then I mean, there were lots of other coaches in between, obviously, and they were all interfacing with the various stages of the crew, you know. But where you were saying, okay, one coach was taking this crew and he was dealing with that crew all the way through to the championship, that really was Tom's baby, as it were, in terms of the senior crew.
And you mentioned Tom up and down the bank. You said was it your bike he was using?
Yeah, most of the time, yeah.
Because if I heard the bike, you often get a bit of
puncture.
Bit of damage if things weren't going well. You might
Yeah.
get around the bike.
Well, in my scale of things, I was grateful that I managed to get across the river so that I could get home again on the pair, you know what I mean? Because that was the only way it was being shipped from UCD over to the far side of the Trinity side. So basically, being able to get that bike back after a training session was my greatest concern. Could I get home that night? So anyway, and these are retrospective thoughts, you know what I mean? But I look at it in the context of the amount of sort of what you might call foot slogging as where to achieve the things that we achieve, you know, and we were all participatory of that, you know. So the bike was kind of incidental.
The bike was shipped across
on the pair. So nobody cycled around. If you cycled around, it was going to take whatever. But I mean, my recollection of those times actually were great. I mean, my home experience is Donegal, so I'm West Coast. So if you think in terms of Dublin, in terms of on the Liffey there, where the weather conditions are generally benign, East Coast winds probably would have been the most difficult one. Heading downriver into Trinity there with an East Coast wind was always going to be a tough one, you know what I mean? So, but generally it was a westerly, northwesterly wind. So I mean, life was fairly, relatively benign on that river there, apart from the bends.
That seems to be a pretty big feature.
Yeah. I suppose in my time, actually, it was kind of unusual. For example, Pat McBride and myself are both Donegal, so you rarely got two people from the one county. And I suppose that probably stood for me. God, there's two Donegal people in this crew, you know, especially '73 there. We rode fours together too, you know, so that's kind of unique in any sort of sporting event. In bigger teams, obviously, it's more, but in a crew, you know, especially a very narrowly focused crew in a four or something like that, you're saying, okay, that's kind of unique. But I think coming from, in my case anyway, a boarding school environment there, which was very regimented there, you know, there was kind of a breakout concept in terms of being given the ability to sort of make your own decisions as to what you want to do in terms of sport, you know. So it was, as I say, being able to be open up in a sporting, where you had a skill set that somebody really appreciated. So UCD gave that to me, and I mean, I'm always grateful. I mean, my grounding in life is very much based on what UCD, not from an academic point of view, but also from a social interface point of view with crews and other guys. Obviously, you can appreciate the ladies' boat club was not there. When I say a social interface, there was none of that. You know what I mean? Well, whenever you organised yourself, fair enough. But I mean, essentially, from a crew perspective point of view, that really was life-enhancing type thing. I say that now in retrospect. You only ever appreciate this afterwards, not at the time. You know, you're going through the motions, as it were, in terms of doing everything, get your degree, get out and get going. But then you're faced up with life, and therefore you suddenly begin to realise that the aspects of what you did in a team aspect, you know, fulfilling, beginning to come true. So I also appreciate that. I think that's one aspect I would say about UCD Boat Club there that sort of really made a difference to me.
You mentioned the ladies' boat club not being there, but I've heard that the name of the animals might have originated from the commercial.
Yeah, I think that was my understanding is that's where it was now. I mean, I say that in the sense that it probably was Commercial Bar, you know, which was the next nearest bar to us, and really if we had to devolve into anywhere, that's where we went to Commercial, you know. But I mean, Commercial obviously had crews like Alan McCabe and Pat Griffin were rowing at that time there, you know. They rowed with me in the World Championship in '74 in a 4, so we had a good interface, you know, with the guys there, you know. But you know, there's huge respect between clubs, you know what I mean, especially when they're as close to that there, you know, with crews that are out in the water there. And now whether we were just sort of power pushing them aside on the river as we went up and down, you know, you could say, okay, no, you know, the way a term evolves, those animals, you know, would never just sort of leave off or give us a bit of space, whatever the case may be, you know, because if you, I mean, that 8, when you saw it in full flight, it was like, whatever you want to sort of, whatever analogy you want to put with it there, like an A380 at the time, going up and down that river, you know. So it looked impressive from the outside, maybe not from the inside where you were suffering, but from the outside it always looked as though these guys are moving, you know. So.
So the one thing I was thinking of, the fact that some of you guys came from around the country, was that, I've heard it mentioned, maybe Tom had nothing against through people, but kind of, if there was, you kind of had this belief in maybe country people, or he wanted to
I
have faith in doing it for your part, and the things that maybe he thought that maybe Dublin people wouldn't appreciate as much as guys coming up from the country representing their own town. Maybe other people have latched on to this more than needed, but
my perspective of that is I think that it was a lottery. I mean, why, as I said, why I went into rowing, I suspect that equally each of those were sort of commandeered, as the case may be, if where it was, or the freshers maybe, or I mean, that was the most obvious place that you would have been solicited, if that's the word to use. Look at the height distribution, weight ratios there, they were all prime talent, you know. I mean, if you were the GA or rugby club there, you would have tried to nurture those guys into the same thing, you know. But I think it was more a lottery, a combination of circumstances, a combination of maybe just at that time, or that combination of guys, and maybe ultimately between the coaches, that the ultimate crew that was put together for whatever it may be, maiden, junior or senior, was just like for example in the maiden 8 in 1969, like Rainer Schultlippen was on, as far as I know, he was gone back to Germany, so he was never he was never available, obviously, for 1970, you know, and he was a talent in my view, you know. Again, retrospectively, he was a good oarsman. He was a guy you want in 6 or even stroke, for that matter, you know. So the way it evolved after that, then obviously it was just whatever talent was coming in there, and whatever you appreciate there, I suppose, to an extent there. When it came to 1974 there was a certain configuration to the crew there, and to a certain extent there may have been what you might have considered a coup d'etat when it came to, not internally, but by definition, you know, because the crew was changed around at the last minute in relation to the final 8 that was configured for the Ladies Plate.
just to get to 74, 74 was very interesting the way it started, in that
Yeah.
it did sort of separate the 4. Well, I suppose maybe one time was 73 first.
Yeah, 73, sorry, yeah, okay.
Again, I think the championship sounds like it was a pretty, if you performed, you were going to win.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, the hard work in terms of ultimately what the championships, I feel a lot of it had to do with the heads of the river races. I mean, we did the mileage, you know, and the mileage for those events was important, you know. So the pattern was always the same every year, whatever way you did it. But I mean, if you're doing the winter training and if you were doing the heads and then the Gannon Cup and then Trinity and all that, it all evolved forward. And if you're a point leader at that time, if you were winning Trinity, obviously that waypoint marker was there. Okay, senior rates, UCD, if that's the case, then they're going to be the crew to beat for the remainder of the year. And all you had to, I wouldn't say all you had to do, but to a certain extent all you had to do was enhance your reputation by winning whatever other regattas, whether it be Drogheda or Galway or Limerick. The vagaries of those events really had to do with the fact of, depending on, like for example, Limerick is a tidal situation now, which really means you could be in trouble, out on a position there that you didn't want to be in, you know what I mean? And we rarely talk about coxes, you know what I mean? But one of the aspects of a cruise you appreciate is the huge element of 9 people on board there. I mean, the cox is the guy or girl, as ladies at the moment, as you appreciate there. Again, retrospectively, said, God, really, we depended on them, to get us there, and a lot of situations there were very much determined by proper positioning at the right time. For example, coming around the Boothas Bend and Island Bridge, being at the right line up there. Those sort of decisions there, although they were hammered into them there, they were important in terms of how you won a race or lost a race, as the case may be. The championship, in my mind, was always. If you think of Blessington at that time, it was a tent situation for the 3 days, as the case may be, and with the trophy tent over there and then whatever else, but there was nothing else, you know what I mean? There was no boathouse, there was nothing at all, so you made your own arrangements out with the boats, etc. there, so it was, and the hotel in Blessington was really where it was the base, that was it. So you got down to the lake and the boat was organised, you got out, and to a certain extent there, the form of the season, it was more or less the last race that we would be involved in, and to a certain extent there was a said, oh yeah, it's going to be over after this, this, so people would have their plans, whatever they may be, if they were working for the summer, the case may be, and there was a certain feeling, okay, this is going to be the last one, you still had to sort of marry up and win, maybe more so in the context of the cruise I was rowing with when Martin was struck there, because we were still on, full on, I mean, it was full throttle, there was no sort of sitting back, I mean, it had to be done, but it had to be done the way that we won and no other way, which was great, so to an extent it was sort of a structured program. We were going out to do this, and that's the way it was going to be done, you know what I mean? So whatever Tom might have said it to, okay, well, you might think about going with 750 for whatever, 20 strokes, but I mean, Martin said, okay, all right, we get out there and we're going to burn it up there. That was it.
It's funny hearing you describe Martin that way, because he'll describe his memories of the crew as almost, how he puts it, 7 week absence behind him, and he's just trying to keep up with them. It's almost he's been driven along by the crew.
I would always, I stroked a crew one and only time in my life, and the reason I stroked a crew one and only time in my life is because Martin had a busted leg, and that's because we were both selected on the Irish crew to row in a Cox 4 in Lucerne in Switzerland in the World Championships in 1974, and 2 weeks beforehand he got stuck on the side of a lorry and hobbled his way out to Switzerland, and so the boat was reconfigured that it be stroke from bow side. So my first and only recollection of stroking a boat ever, before that and after that, was sitting beside East Germany in a heat of the Coxed 4s in the World Championship in Switzerland. So I have great respect for strokes. So, and to a certain extent, in eights, he stands out as some of those hard, grizzled, hardcore guys who are not going to give up there, but with the capacity to understand where the race is, and I think that was important. I mean, obviously between Cox and himself, that was the issue. Okay, where are we at? What's going on? Gannon Cup, for example, they were important races. Some of them we won easily, others might have been a bit tighter, but generally it was a kind of ruthlessness of the stroke in each case.
There is that pops one day in my head of the 74 race against Harvard in Nottingham.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember the heat of that.
That's right.
In the semi-final, so you were up beating Harvard.
Yeah.
But easily on a qualifying final. So no great
pressure, yeah.
Martin was convinced the coach that said it between the Cox decided there was no need to keep racing it. But I can't remember where you were in both.
I think I was 7 at that time, yeah.
So you were probably not there.
Discussion.
Further back, but do you remember much of that?
Not really, no. There's the leader, as it were. Martin was the leader, okay, and to an extent, whatever was being discussed, you didn't have much option. You followed, and that was it. That's actually, I suppose, the aspect of the crew there. You just really had to sort of toe the line. Whatever. I don't really recollect that in detail. And I suppose that's one of the essence of being a follower in a crew. You know, you have your own job to do at whatever position you're in there, and you do it regardless of whatever the game plan is for that race. My recollection of those races, they were tight. But going back to what I said earlier, the aspect of being able to row competitively abroad was a significant issue for the club at that time. And obviously they were warm-up races in relation to the ultimate goal. So this idea of having a different platform as to where you wanted crew to be, other than just say rowing in national races in Ireland and then going to Henley, you were being put out to sort of experience what the competition is like in other areas. And as I said earlier about the likes of Harvard, you know, I mean, you have this sort of iconic view of, say, a Harvard crew. I wasn't too much aware of Quinton other than they were the form guys for Thames at the time there. In theory, they should really have been able to sort of handle us. But that's like a carrot to Martin. He said, put it out there. Okay, let's just show them. And that's really what he does, you know. So he does so well, you know.
Yeah, well, it sounds like the times I've heard that the Quinton were thrown by the 10 firm side and 20.
Yep. Tactics, yeah. I suppose it wasn't a game plan to an extent that was always there. You know, my only real recollection of that is where it was done in the final in Henley against London, UL, University of London, and it was very specific that was going to be done at a certain point in the race there. So everybody had to be on that, tuned into that one. It was done in other races, of course, you know, not in a kind of a formula that we all worked to at the time. You know what I mean? The intimacy of those sort of details in a race there were always sort of maybe sidelined on the basis you always knew it was going to be a torture at the end anyway. You know what I mean? So you really had to just prepare yourself for that. But the power's all right as it would be a silent situation there. Always required guys to be in on that game, so you really need to be sure that everybody was sort of tuned into what was happening. So it was a silent 10, it had to work. But generally, yeah.
So then there was championships in 73, there was also Henley in 73 again.
I was against ISIS in a heat, and I think it was 6:09 or something. And at that time, the headline was UCD break record, you know, and fastest time since I think it was Aegir in Holland a couple of years beforehand, you know. So it was sort of, but I always like. In the modern context of fake news and good news, etc. there, always bear in mind conditions, and Henley had been a river, and flood and water and wind and all those things there were circumstantial in the event, so it was a win, yeah, but it was a good win. But then it also indicated it was a tight race, you know, so yeah, it looked good. But at the end of the day, who won? The ladies, you know, so that probably is, I mean, the crews were moving forward, and this aspect of the evolution of crews there in terms of where they would be. I mean, we keep saying we fought the brave battles in Henley, and I had been there I think 3 times, you know what I mean, before. So each year you're saying, okay, are we ever going to win this? You know, and guys who've been in crews, all UCD guys who rode in Henley would appreciate the same view. You know, basically you're spending a fortnight there, you know, in maybe a pre-regatta, etc., or Marlow, Nottingham, whatever the case may be, and then do the preliminaries, the eliminations and all that to get there, and being close but not quite close enough there, you know. So it's that particular race, it was great to get a record from that point of view, but it was an indication of how relatively good that crew was too, you know. It was a good crew. The heavies were on board at that stage.
Yeah, but I can't say 73 was a great crew, and
Yeah.
And not winning any, like, was actually heartbreaking.
There's a watershed. Yeah. Yeah. The best laid plans, though, don't always necessarily work out, especially when you get a tough opposition call, you know. The differentiating factor between 73 and 74, I suppose, is, if you think about it, is that having lost that there, it came back and won the championship, as opposed to 74, having won there and come back and lost the championship. And I suppose you could say, in the modern context of team management, you would never do that again. You know, you would manage your team. You know, if you want to peak for Henley, so be it, you know what I mean? But then you would have to allow for the fact that whatever you're going to do back in your own country there is going to be different. You know, you wouldn't necessarily, you're either, as in rugby, you would empty the bench in some form or other, assuming the bench was good enough to sort of sub in and get a crew good enough to win the championship, you know. But just for example, in 74, my recollection is after that of being extremely tired, exhausted, both mentally and physically, you know, coming back and having to go up to Blessington, sleeping on the way up, which I rarely do, you know what I mean, but just exhaustion. But still, you had to go out and fess up in terms of the guards who were lurking in the bushes, basically, and ambushed, both in the blue ribbon and in the senior eight. So, you know, if you look back and then to say, if you rode the next year, you know, there was a learning lesson there, you know, in the sense you peaked for an event which you ultimately won, which was a life-changing aspect in terms of UCD's history. But in the modern context of how you would manage a team, I think you would look at that differently, you know.